And Dricus Du Plessis will still be the middleweight champion of the world.
I'm going with Dricus Du Plessis. I've been leaning towards Dricus Du Plessis for the longest time.
DDP matches his crazy, drags Khamzat into deep waters of the 3rd and 4th and 5th round, and gets him out of there. That's how I see this fight going.
Khamzat Chimaev is going to destroy Dricus Du Plessis. Khamzat Chimaev will beat Dricus Du Plessis at UFC 319. That's right, you guys see the videos, all these UFC analysts, experts, and active fighters all predicting UFC 319 wrong. That Dricus Du Plessis was going to beat Khamzat Chimaev. You know who got it right? This guy. So as your Khamzat Chimaev expert, in today's video, I am going to tell you guys how the rest of Khamzat Chimaev's career will go. We will look at his upcoming middleweight title reign, who his next fight will be against, but we're going to go beyond that and tell you the rest of his fights in his UFC career and how it'll end. So make sure to watch till the end of the video because it is an ending that you guys are not going to expect. But without further ado, let's get right into it. So how are we in the situation we are today with Khamzat Chimaev as the middleweight champion? Well, UFC 319 was Dricus Du Plessis versus Khamzat Chimaev. And Dricus Du Plessis was the reigning middleweight champion. He beat a bunch of legends in his rise to the title. He had a good title win and a couple good title defenses since winning the title. And he has been nothing short of impressive. He's been undefeated thus far in the UFC until UFC 319, and it was going to be a huge fight between him and undefeated contender Khamzat Chimaev. And every analyst, expert, and fighter on YouTube predicting this fight said that if Khamzat Chimaev doesn't win in the first round, that Dricus Du Plessis is going to win the fight. Everybody was saying this. You guys saw this everywhere. But if you watch some of my videos here, you guys know that I told you that Khamzat Chimaev would beat Dricus Du Plessis and then this cardio issue just doesn't exist. It's not a thing. It doesn't exist. I told you precisely that Khamzat Chimaev's wrestling level was way too high for Dricus Du Plessis to handle, and that was the case Saturday at UFC 319. However, after that total domination Saturday in what seemed like a 10-8 round in practically every round, maybe except the 5th round, we now have Khamzat Chimaev as the middleweight champion, and normally you would have a rematch between him and Dricus Du Plessis, given that Dricus was undefeated before and had multiple title defenses. However, this fight was so lopsided, so dominant, that a rematch is not even in the picture right now. So that brings us to who will fight Khamzat Chimaev next. A lot of people are saying that Fluffy Hernandez should be the next fighter in the middleweight division to fight Khamzat Chimaev. I believe he's on an 8 or 9-0 winning streak in the UFC that dates back multiple years at this point. And he just beat Roman Dolidze in crazy dominant fashion like nobody has before. He literally beat this guy like he stole something from him. He was choking him out and dragging him backwards. It was ridiculous. It did not look like a UFC fight. It looked like an upperclassman beating down on a little freshman. And then you got another camp of people who are arguing that RDR, Rainer de Ritter, should be the next person to fight Khamzat Chimaev. I believe that this is a little bit more of a valid take given that RDR just beat Robert Whittaker, who's been a top 5 middleweight forever, it seems at this point. Whereas Roman Dolidze is nowhere near the level of Robert Whittaker, and he was nowhere near the ranking of Robert Whittaker. So for that reason, I would say RDR deserves the next title shot over Fluffy Hernandez. However, if I'm really being honest with you, I think that the winner of Nasruddin Imavov versus Kyle Baralho should get the next title shot. And those two fight each other on September 6th, so we're only a couple weeks away from it, so it lines up pretty well with UFC 319. So that right after that fight, you could have a face-off in the ring, you could have Khamzat in attendance, and build up for a big fight for Khamzat's first title defense. You know, Khamzat was saying he wanted to fight at UFC 321 in Abu Dhabi. This would be end of October. However, I don't think that that's going to happen. You already have Tom Aspinall versus Ciryl Gane on that card. And normally, how most times title fights go when there's 2 fights on the same card, the heavier weight class will be the later fight. So that would put Tom Aspinall versus Ciryl Gane as the last fight on that card and Khamzat Chimaev as a co-main event. However, I think that Khamzat Chimaev has just surpassed Ilia Topuria as the biggest fighter in the UFC right now, and if he hasn't, then he's definitely number 2, and you cannot put that guy in a co-main event. The whole fight card will be about him. You can't put him in the co-main event, because then you're going to get to the main event, and it's just not going to feel as big as a Khamzat Chimaev fight. This guy is the superstar in the game with the potential to be as big as Conor McGregor and Khabib Nurmagomedov. So for that reason, and given Khamzat Chimaev's history, what we're not going to do on this channel is just ignore Khamzat Chimaev's history. He fights once per year. That's the type of fighter he is. I do think that this will get a little bit better with him being champion now. No one will duck him because people need the title shot. I think that we'll probably see him fight about twice a year. I would love to see this go up to 3 or 4 times a year. Someone like Alex Pereira does this in the light heavyweight division. But what we're definitely not seeing very unlikely is that Khamzat Chimaev is going to already be fighting in October against this next opponent. But this is fine because Nasruddin Imavov versus Kyle Barajo, who both deserve the title fight more than RDR and Fluffy Hernandez, the winner of that fight lines up with this timeline, and they will be fighting probably beginning of 2026, hopefully end of 2025. And then I think whichever opponent that is, I think that Nasruddin Imavov would be the better opponent to face Khamzat Chimaev. He's more deserving and a better wrestler. I think that Khamzat Chimaev beats him anyways, and that they probably don't make it all 5 rounds. However, we will see. People are saying, oh, Dricus is so bad he got dominated. No, that's not the case. Dricus Du Plessis is beating all of his opponents. He beat Sean Strickland twice, Robert Whitaker, Israel Adesanya. This guy has impressive wins, and he just got dominated by Khamzat Chimaev. That is not a slight against Dricus Du Plessis. That is a testament to how good Khamzat Chimaev really is as an MMA fighter. This is some of the most dominant wrestling we've ever seen. I think that it is more impressive than Khabib's wrestling. You know, it would have been nice to see Khamzat Chimaev go for more of a finish rather than just dominating. He did land over 500 strikes, but none of them were these crazy shots. However, to be able to hold a man in a crucifix for 5 rounds is ridiculous, especially when that man is the reigning champion of the UFC. And another reason why Khamzat Chimaev will not be fighting on that October Abu Dhabi card, in my opinion, is that we've been waiting so long for a Tom Aspinall fight, and this will be Tom Aspinall's first defense as the undisputed heavyweight champion, so you don't need another fight on there to carry that card, and you definitely don't need a Khamzat Chimaev fight on that card. And here's some Herrick Insider News, as promised to everybody who watches my videos. Once a video, we will have Herrick Insider News that you will not get on any other channel. We bring you guys niche news every video multiple times a week. And it is that over 3,000 people attended the weigh-ins for UFC 319 because Khamzat Chimaev was fighting, and almost 4,000 people attended the ceremonial press conference. Those are crazy numbers that you don't see for other UFC pay-per-views. This has the feeling of Conor McGregor pay-per-views from way back in the day. This is crazy numbers. And then, even on top of that, in Chicago's United Center, which is where UFC 319 was, this was the biggest gate of all time for that stadium. And that might not mean anything to you guys until you think about this. Michael Jordan and the Bulls played in that arena. They won 6 championships in that arena, and Khamzat Chimaev and that pay-per-view had a bigger gate than any of those games, any of those playoffs or finals games, or any game that Michael Jordan was ever a part of. And he's widely considered the greatest basketball player of all time. But considering if we book Khamzat Chimaev against the winner of Nasruddin Imavov versus Kyle Barajo, we got some other matchups to make in the middleweight division, and that wasn't scheduled to be in this video, but I'm gonna give it to you guys anyways. What we're going to do is Dricus Du Plessis versus Reynard the Ritter. That is going to be a great matchup. 2 people with crazy styles. That would be a great fight. And then you do the loser of Nasruddin Imavov versus Barajo. You have the loser of that fight Fluffy Hernandez. And then after that, that sets him up for a #1 contenders match or a title fight right after that, depending on the timeline of things. And then you have Israel Adesanya versus Michael Venom Page. It would be a great striking matchup. Everybody would love to watch that. You could throw that on any card and it's going to boost sales. Maybe if you have a weaker pay-per-view, you throw that on the card, it's going to boost sales. You could literally put it anywhere. And then I'll even give you some extra sauce. In a whole different division, you do Leon Edwards versus Carlos Prates. I know MVP and Carlos Prates talked about fighting each other, but we do not want to see that. MVP and Prates, for the most parts, are fan favorites. Some people get annoyed with MVP, saying that he doesn't actually do that much striking and it gets boring. But we don't need these guys to fight each other, especially when MVP just got a great win at middleweight. You don't need to go back down divisions. Keep this momentum going and see how far you can go at middleweight. Do not go down to welterweight. So now that we have those matchups laid out, we could progress down Khamzat Chimaev's future title reign in the UFC. So I think that, as I said, he will beat the winner of Imavov versus Barajo. And then if RDR beats DDP, which I don't think will happen, you would have Khamzat Chimaev versus RDR, which I think he will win. I don't think they give DDP that rematch just too quick. They might make him do one more fight before getting back in there. But we just saw how that fight goes. I don't think that there's any improvements DDP can make at this short amount of time for him to get back in the ring with Chimaev and beat him. So I have Chimaev beating Dricus Du Plessis as well. And then MVP versus Israel Adesanya is a huge fight, especially if Adesanya wins. They're going to give him a title shot because they love giving him his fights. And if MVP wins, I could see them doing that too, because MVP is reaching the end of his career and he's a fan favorite, so they want to get him a title shot if it makes sense. Both those guys are great strikers in their own regard. Do not get it twisted. But what they are not is great or even decent wrestlers. Those are 2 guys who would get dominated by Khamzat Chimaev. People were talking about how bad Dricus Du Plessis looked and how Sean Strickland and Israel Adesanya would do better. Stop. That's so false. Israel Adesanya and Sean Strickland both get submitted in less than 2 rounds. I promise you that. Dricus Du Plessis is way more of a well-rounded fighter. I mean, he even submitted Israel Adesanya. And you think that Israel Adesanya is going to do better than Dricus Du Plessis against Khamzat Chimaev? No, Khamzat's going to throw Israel around the ring and choke him out. Probably in the first round, maybe in the second. And it's the same thing with Sean Strickland. Sean Strickland's just not as strong as Dricus Du Plessis. I think Khamzat Chimaev either chokes him out or gets a ground and pound knockout. I know that Sean Strickland has a little bit of a wrestling background, but I promise you it is not enough to handle Khamzat Chimaev. And so this leaves us with Baralho versus Hernandez. If the winner of that faces Khamzat Chimaev, I think Khamzat beats either of them. I know Hernandez looks good, and he's the one person right now that Twitter MMA is talking about they're going to beat Khamzat Chimaev, when I really don't think you can make that argument. The people that Fluffy Hernandez is facing right now are nowhere near Khamzat's level or anybody in the top 5 of the UFC, so you can't really say, oh, he looked great here, he's going to do this to Khamzat Chimaev. No. Khamzat Chimaev just dominated Dricus Du Plessis, who would beat Fluffy Hernandez and Roman Dolidze. But you think that because Fluffy Hernandez beat Roman Dolidze that he's going to beat Khamzat Chimaev? That's comparing apples to oranges, dude. Get out of here with that comparison. And Kyle Baralho is relatively younger, and he is on the Fighting Nerds, which is a great gym. And he looks to be continually improving, so maybe he gets good enough to where he can face Khamzat. But we literally have footage of him getting choked out by Khamzat Chimaev from a training camp not too long ago. And I just think Khamzat Chimaev's wrestling is going to be way too much for Kyle Baralho to handle. I think Kyle Baralho is more trolling at this point. He definitely wants the fight, and he's trying to put himself in that picture. But deep down, he knows that if he gets in the octagon with Khamzat Chimaev, that he's losing. So where does this leave us? This leaves us as Khamzat Chimaev being undefeated in the middleweight division. I mean, the last fighter you could toss in there would be Sean Strickland or Jared Cannonier, and Khamzat Chimaev's going to destroy both those fighters. So you're like, all right, Travis, what now? Does Khamzat Chimaev just retire as the middleweight GOAT, maybe the all-around GOAT of the UFC, and just retire undefeated as the champion? Maybe. He could do that, but I don't think he wants to. Now, an early retirement for Khamzat Chimaev and a one-division champion retirement for Khamzat Chimaev is not off the table. He has had notable health concerns in the past that could cause him to retire early. And from the lifestyle he portrays on his Instagram and other social media accounts, it seems like he does have money and that is not a problem. I've heard Khamzat Chimaev say way too many times that he wants more than just to be a one-division champ, so I think he's going to push for more, like Islam Makhachev is right now, before he retires. And speaking of which, Khamzat Chimaev said that he wants to move down and face the winner of Jack Della Maddalena versus Islam Makhachev to try to be the 170 champ that will make him a 2-division champion in the UFC. Khamzat Chimaev has fought at 170 in the past, and he's been undefeated there. I'm not going to go too into depth to this, and I'll put the video right here because I've talked about this last week, that Khamzat Chimaev versus Islam Makhachev is a potential matchup that could come to the UFC. So if you want to hear about that, go watch that video after this one, but stay with me for now. I think that if Khamzat Chimaev goes down to fight those guys, that he wins either of those fights unless he is in very bad condition due to a bad weight cut. The reason that Khamzat Chimaev moved from welterweight to middleweight was because the weight cuts were too bad, they were causing health issues, and he was missing weight. I think that it's potential for him to have that, especially since his body's used to 185 now. If he goes all the way down to 170, a 15-pound difference, not just your 10-pound difference, that could cause health concerns, and that will mean that we have a not full 100% Khamzat Chimaev in the octagon. And if you're going against someone as Islam Makhachev's level or Jack Della Maddalena's level, that could be enough to make you lose that match. Those are two of the best fighters in the UFC, and if you try to fight them not at your best, you're just asking for trouble. However, if it goes smoothly and he goes down healthy, I think he beats both of them. I know that Islam Makhachev is a great wrestler, but I also know that Islam Makhachev has not faced anybody even close to Khamzat Chimaev's level of wrestling or size in the UFC. So I have Khamzat Chimaev beating him, assuming he's fully healthy. Now looking at other matchups at 170, if Khamzat Chimaev were to stay there, there's Kamaru Usman, who gave Khamzat Chimaev his closest fight to date. However, Kamaru Usman's getting older, and Khamzat Chimaev is just getting better right now. So I think that Khamzat Chimaev beats Kamaru Usman again. Cardio semi looked like the problem in their first fight, and Khamzat Chimaev just proved through 25 minutes of domination that cardio is not a problem anymore in his UFC career, as I predicted. Sean Brady's an intriguing matchup as he just dominated Leon Edwards in wrestling, similar to how Khamzat Chimaev just did to Dricus Du Plessis. However, Sean Brady's like 5'8", and Khamzat Chimaev is 6'2". That is way too much of a size, even if you want to call them even level wrestlers, which I disagree and think Khamzat's better. Khamzat Chimaev's size and strength advantage there would be too much for Sean Brady to handle, and he would beat Sean Brady. Leon Edwards would absolutely get destroyed by Khamzat Chimaev, as would Ian Gary. Those are strikers whose wrestling is not good enough to deal with him. You could throw Carlos Prates and Jeff Neal into that same boat. Looking at somebody like Shavkat Rakhmonov, this is probably one of the most intriguing matchups at 170. And prior to Shavkat Rakhmonov versus Ian Gary, I would say that this would be a really good and close fight, and that Shavkat probably could beat Khamzat Chimaev. However, we literally saw Shavkat almost get choked out by Ian Gary, who is a striker. Imagine if he fought Khamzat Chimaev, who is the most dominant wrestler of all time. If you're almost getting choked out by Ian Gary, you are getting put to sleep by Khamzat Chimaev. I think that JDM would be a good matchup. JDM's pretty big, but ultimately I don't think JDM has good enough wrestling defense to deal with Khamzat Chimaev. Bilal Muhammad, like him or not, I don't. He's one of the best wrestlers in the division and the UFC. He'd be one of the better matchups at 170 for Khamzat Chimaev. However, similar to Usman, he's getting older and not as good, and Khamzat Chimaev's level of wrestling is way higher than Bilal Muhammad. Bilal Muhammad just smothers, he does pressure, but Khamzat Chimaev goes out there to destroy his opponent. And I think that he would absolutely run through Bilal. Joaquin Buckley previously looked like it could be a good matchup. He is another smaller, shorter opponent. He's very stocky and built, so it'd be a good fight. And he just lost to Kamaru Usman, most notably in the wrestling department, and Kamaru Usman lost to Khamzat Chimaev. So MMA math, I know it's not real, but it is real in this case. Khamzat Chimaev would beat Joaquin Buckley. And looking at Michael Morales, I just don't think that Michael Morales is experienced enough to deal with Khamzat Chimaev, especially in wrestling. He's a great striker and solid fighter, but he cannot deal with Khamzat Chimaev. So that is two divisions now, 170 welterweight and 185 middleweight, that I think Khamzat Chimaev will go undefeated in if he makes it to the second weight class. And to take it one step further, Khamzat Chimaev has talked about wanting to be a triple champ and going to 205 to fight Magomed Ankalaev, Alex Pereira, or whoever else is champion there. And here's where we start to run into problems. I do think that he beats most of the contenders here. I think he beats Yuri Prohaska, Jamal Hill, Khalil Roundtree. I don't think that either of those wrestlers can deal with Khamzat Chimaev's wrestling. I think that Carlos Ulberg is overrated and shouldn't have beat Jan Blachowicz. And I think that Jan is getting too old and will not be able to deal with Khamzat Chimaev's aggression and speed. So this really leaves us with Magomed Ankalaev and Alex Pereira. And the problem we get to here is Khamzat Chimaev said he would go to 205 after going to 170. That would mean in the UFC he went to 170, 185, back down to 170, and then up to 205, and you're going to face some of the best fighters in the world in Magomed Ankalaev and Alex Pereira. This is where trouble could happen. I don't think that he would have enough time if he did this for his body to get used to 205 after cutting down to 170. It wouldn't properly adjust. We saw this with Max Holloway versus Dustin Poirier 2, their second fight. Max Holloway didn't have sufficient time to build his body up for 155, and that was the reason why Dustin Poirier was able to beat him in that fight. But then later in his career, Max Holloway built up for it, and just last month was able to beat Dustin Poirier, which everybody also predicted wrong, but I predicted right. So subscribe for the best predictions on MMA. I think that'd be the situation with Khamzat Chimaev. If you go from 185 down 15 pounds, and then you want to go up 35 pounds to 205, I think that's asking for trouble. His body would not be ready for that. I think someone like Pereira could knock him out. Although assuming Khamzat Chimaev is anywhere close to his full level, I think that he would get Pereira down and would end up beating him. But with that weight problem and his body not being ready, I could see him honestly getting knocked out by Pereira. And then looking at Magomed Ankalaev, this is where I draw the line. I think that Magomed Ankalaev is a super well-rounded fighter that will be too good of a wrestler and too large of an opponent for Khamzat Chimaev to be able to dominate like he has with his other opponents. And then when you combine that with Khamzat Chimaev's body changing shapes, changing all these weight classes, going up to 205, I don't think that he'd be ready for the size and level of Magomed Ankalaev, and I think that Magomed would win that fight. Not saying that Khamzat couldn't win that fight, but if he does it the way he says he's going to do it, going down to 170, then 205, I don't think it will work out good. However, if I'm being honest, I don't think he'll ever go to 205. I think that Khamzat Chimaev will stay at 185 and remain undefeated in his career. I think that he will either retire there or go down for one fight at 170 if the opponent is right, and I think he will beat them. You can expect to see this, especially if it's a striker as champion at 170. Khamzat could have a couple wins at 185, see that as an easy double win opportunity. He'd go down there, get the double belt, dominate a striker. It'd be an easy win for him as long as he makes the weight, and then retire as double champ, and we would probably be calling him the GOAT of the UFC at that point. But with that being said, let me know down below what you guys think. Is there anybody in the middleweight division that you think is going to beat Khamzat Chimaev? And if there is, please let me know. But with that being said, thank you guys for making it this far. Subscribe if you like this video, because I post 2 or 3 videos a week just like this one, and like the video if you enjoyed it. Those things help me out a ton. And I'll see you guys later this week with the next upload. Deuces.